What's up everyone, my name is Ricky and I was one of 4 Scout owners invited by Indian Motorcycle to Arizona to test ride the new 2022 Indian Chief. Journalists and huge YouTubers like Blockhead and Her Two Wheels were there as well. It was awesome to get to meet them and so many others. I'll make sure to link everyone down below. We rode hundreds of miles in all sorts of conditions and even camped in a ghost town alongside the bikes. Indian Motorcycle wanted us as Scout owners to experience the new Chief for what it was intended for, going on some long distance trips, ripping on some curvy roads, and creating long-lasting memories with some friends. In this video, I want to give you guys my opinions on the new 2022 Indian Chief lineup from an Indian Scout Bobber's owner's perspective. If you guys like this type of content, make sure to click that like button, subscribe, and hit that bell notification for future videos. When I got the Scout, it was the perfect fit for me, and if you saw my review, you know I absolutely love this bike and the bobber look. I was just getting into bikes and I didn't want anything to get in between me and the raw experience of riding a motorcycle. I also knew that it had enough power to keep me happy for years to come, and I wasn't wrong. Once I began to do longer trips, I started missing those things I didn't think I wanted at first. Cruise control, better suspension and seating position, etc. My wife loves riding with me, but it's tough on her. She's done some serious miles as a passenger on the Scout Bobber, and I know we would be crushing a lot more together if the bike was better suited. But to be honest, being that I wasn't ready to commit to that bagger life just yet, I felt my options were limited. There was a big gap between the Scout Bobber platform and their other bikes that offered these things that I was looking for. The plan was to wait a few years and then go full-on bagger with a Challenger or a Chieftain. Then they announced the Indian Chief, which is intended to fill that gap and address those needs that Scout owners like myself have. So, is it the next step for Scout owners like myself? Am I going to be trading my Scout Bobber for one? And if you don't own a Scout Bobber, should you get a Chief instead? I'll tell you what I think, but first, let's take a deep dive look at the Chief. There are 6 different trims to choose from. The 3 base models, the Chief, Chief Bobber, and Super Chief come with the Thunderstroke 111. The Dark Horse and Limited variants come with a 116 and that beautiful touchscreen with Ride Command. Cruise control, riding modes, keyless ignitions come standard on all 6. The Thunderstroke 111 has 108 foot-pounds of torque and it peaks out at 3,200 RPM. The Thunderstroke 116 has 120 foot-pounds of torque that peaks at 2,900 RPM. The Scout, on the other hand, has 72 foot-pounds of torque with 100 horsepower. If you've ever ridden a Scout, you know it's very nimble and it really starts to shine around the 5,000 RPM mark, which is considered high in the cruiser world. Air-cooled engines are known for their low and mid-range torque, so I was very interested in how they compared and if I noticed a significant difference between the two, both in performance and handling. Here are more specs on the Chief and how it compares to the Scout. I had time on both the 111 and 116 and the power difference is noticeable. But don't get me wrong, the 111 is enough power for anyone out there. Coming from a Scout Stage 1, I really didn't feel like I was missing anything. Passing on the highway and picking up speed after a curve wasn't a problem. But now that I've tried the 116, I can't go back. I spent a few hours with a Chief Dark Horse with the Stage 2 and I didn't want to give it back. The Scout is quick and very light, so it could hang with most cruisers out there. That's one of the things that we Scout owners love. But man, this Chief is no joke. I think it would be very close between a Scout and a 116 Stage 1. Now, if you throw a Stage 2 on a 116, I think it could take on the Scout. The power was ridiculous all throughout the RPM range until around 5,000 RPM. When I'm cruising on the Scout, either on the highway or on some back roads, I find myself shifting down when I want to pass or something. Like I said, the Scout sweet spot is around the 5,000 RPM. On the Chief, I could be cruising at 2,000 RPM on the highway and pull on that throttle and the power was there. So I noticed I was using the engine's full potential a lot more. Sometimes it was a little too much when I just wanted to cruise, so that's why I love having the different ride modes. Riding modes totally changed the characteristics of the bike in both performance and sound. I was a little skeptical, thinking it was more of a gimmick, but it does make a huge difference, and I found myself using them a lot more than I thought. We rode on some gravel roads and it even rained on us at some point, so I switched it to touring and it really tamed down the throttle response. When on straight and long roads, I used sport mode the most. That's when I was really opening her up and having a blast. In the curbs, I felt like the sport mode was too twitchy, so I was using standard mode and it was perfect. Super predictable and just enough response to get on it when exiting curves. I don't need the keyless ignition, but it's super cool to have. Very convenient to not have to be playing around with a small key and huge gloves. The rear cylinder deactivation is a cool feature to have, especially where I live, and I didn't feel it getting in the way of the experience. 2 thumbs up. The standard Chief comes with a very similar gauge than the Scout, but you have things like the fuel gauge, which is awesome. There's these little triggers on both sides to switch around the different options. The one on the right is where you change the riding modes and turn on or off the rear cylinder deactivation mode. On the Chief Dark Horse and Limited, you get the amazing touchscreen display where you have essential information like the speedo, tach, fuel gauge, turn-by-turn navigation, etc. This combined with the 116 is a no-brainer for me to go with either the Dark Horse or the Limited, unless you want a blank canvas so you can go really crazy and make it your own. On the Chief, the seat height is 26 inches versus the 25.6 on the Scout, making both bikes very accessible to all types of riders. The Chief has a lean angle of 28.5 degrees versus the 29 degrees on the Scout. It has a front travel of 5.2 inches versus the 4.7 inches on the Scout, and a rear travel of 3 inches versus the 2 inches on the Scout. The lean angle is limited, but let me tell you, I was ripping on some curves and at no point I felt like I needed more. There's a big improvement in suspension when you compare it to the Scout Bobber. I found myself bracing for some bumps that usually shake my soul on my bike, but the Chief took them like a champ. We all spoke of how impressed we were with the suspension and the seat. Let's talk about comfort. The good thing about the Chief platform is that you have tons of options to choose from. The Chief comes with mid controls, the Chief Bobber with forwards, and the Super Chief with floorboards. This really comes down to preference. I'm 5'7", 5'8", and I'm torn between the Chief and the Chief Bobber. I went in thinking I would prefer the Bobber because I was looking for comfort, but I really did feel comfortable enough on the Chief with forward controls and drag bars. It reminded me of the Scout Bobber seating position, but more upright, making it a more comfortable ride. With mid controls, you feel more in control of the bike when leaning on some curves, but if you're on the tall side, I would definitely go with forward controls. You don't have the option for mid controls on the Scout, although there are aftermarket companies that sell kits for it. Forward control was my favorite setup both on the Chief and the Chief Bobber. I don't know, there's just something about riding an American motorcycle with your legs up front. At first, I wasn't a fan of the floorboards, but as soon as I got used to them, I totally get it. So comfy. On the Chief, you have a few options to choose from when it comes to handlebars. You have drag bars on the regular Chief, mini apes on the Chief Bobber, and cruiser handlebars on the Super Chief. Versus on the Scout, where you have the drag bars on the Bobber edition and mini apes on the Bobber 20. I was also very impressed with the seat. We rode about 7 hours that day and none of us were complaining about it being uncomfortable. Both bikes have a low center of gravity, which makes them very nimble and fun to throw around in corners. I honestly felt right at home jumping from the Scout to the Chief. Even though I will say the Chief suspension is superior and the extra travel is very noticeable. It wasn't until I got back on the Scout Bobber that I realized the Chief was a bigger bike. I really didn't notice it throwing it around in curves and moving around in parking lots. Leaning on the Chief felt very comfortable, and I never felt like I needed more, and trust me, we hit some curves pretty hard and aggressively. When I first got the Scout, it was pretty easy for me to scrape pegs, but ever since then, I've been trying to improve my riding skills and body position, so I don't feel like I have to lean the bike as much anymore. I've gotten used to the Scout and how it handles. Having the engine as a stress member in the frame makes the bike rigid, which gives you a lot of confidence in the curves. I really didn't notice a difference between the Scout and the Chief when it comes to handling. The brakes on the Chief are incredible. The Scout has really good brakes too, but there's a big improvement on the Chief, especially when we talk about the rear brake. Those Pirelli Night Dragon tires are amazing. Our day started off pretty cold and it even rained on us, and at no point did I feel sketchy on those tires. They really gave me a lot of confidence while riding and are extremely grippy. When you look at the Chief, you can't help but notice that gorgeous Thunderstroke V-twin air-cooled engine enclosed by that beautiful steel frame, a very traditional approach in design. The Scout, on the other hand, comes with a water-cooled engine, which is a stress member of a multiple-part cast aluminum frame, a very modern approach. The Chief certainly has design elements inspired by the Scout, but it's a more classic approach in design and performance by going with a steel frame and an air-cooled engine. When talking to the people who designed the bike, they focus on three main things, and in this order: style, performance, and technology. Even though I am a huge fan of the Scout look and its design, I absolutely love that they went with the steel frame. It really helps to highlight that beautiful American V-twin engine, making it the center stage of the bike. It also opens up the door for customization, and I'm super excited to see what people come up with. With the 6 different trims, I feel like they tried to cover all tastes and riding styles compared to the 4 trims that you find on the Scout lineup. These are the main differences between the Scout and the Chief. On the Chief, you have a steel frame with an air-cooled engine versus on the Scout, where you have a cast aluminum frame with a water-cooled engine. On the Chief, you also have cruise control, riding modes, and keyless ignition, which you don't find on the Scout. Now, let's talk about the things I don't like. To be completely honest, there's really not that much, but since it's a review, I feel like I have to tell you something. In some of the bikes, the cables going to the ride command were very noticeable, but I imagine you can move things around to hide them better. Now let's talk about the things I love on the Chief. I love how customizable this bike is. I've already seen some computer renderings and I'm excited to see what builders do with it. Personally, I think Indian Motorcycle hit it out of the park with this design. A lot of people were surprised with Indian Motorcycle's decision to go with a steel frame and an air-cooled engine. Some even questioned if this was a step backwards for them. I was a little skeptical myself, but after riding this bike for so many miles, I can unequivocally say no. The way they added modern technology in a seamless way is brilliant, and it gives us a customizable platform to go crazy and make our own. Honestly, I feel like Indian Motorcycle listened to us Scout owners and made this bike. It has everything I love in the Scout, like its handling, the power, the looks, plus it adds some features that really improve my riding, like cruise control, riding modes, GPS, turn-by-turn navigation, etc. So, is this the next step for Scout owners like myself? If you're looking to do long distance trips but aren't ready to jump into that bagger life, I would say 100% yes. And if you don't own a Scout, should you get a Chief instead? This is a tough one. I think it depends on a few factors. What are you going to be using the bike mostly for? Is it going to be around town, maybe commuting back and forth to work? I would say the Scout would be perfect for you. But if you're thinking of doing longer trips and riding 2-up, I would strongly recommend the Indian Chief. I know what you're asking yourself. Am I trading in my Scout Bobber for an Indian Chief? And Sorry for the interruption. I was about to give you 1,000 reasons why I would or wouldn't trade in my Scout Bobber, but the reality is I am too emotionally attached to this bike. And I'm not the only one.
This bike isn't going anywhere.
I guess we're getting a second bike, huh? Anyways, hope you guys liked the video. Make sure to click like and subscribe. See you guys on the next one.